DCS video. Today we're in the Mi-8 HIP, and we're gonna take this opportunity to have a little look at how flying helicopters is similar or different from flying fixed-wing aircraft. Specifically, I'm going to talk about flying a heavier helicopter such as the HIP. So, I'm currently over, just southeast, southwest. Directions are hard. Southwest of Senaki Air Base. And I have taken off from a farm that is placed somewhat south of here. So we're gonna do a turn over Senaki, and then we're gonna head back down to the farm, and we'll have a look at how to actually manage the aircraft. I am currently trimmed in a forward flight and into a certain right-hand turn. And now you see that I'm actually heading down just a bit. Slightly descending. Now if I apply some more pressure here, you see that nose is coming up, and also that my right hand bank stops somewhat, and this is due to the torque of the actual rotor. So as the rotors start spinning heavier and gripping more air, it's gonna be counteracted by the movement of the helicopter. So if I keep applying collective to get torque, you see that I'm actually tilting over to the other side, and at the same time I get my nose pulled up until I start losing speed, and then it drops back down. And this is a very good example of the multitude of different forces working on a helicopter in flight. Somebody said that a helicopter doesn't fly as much as it whips itself into the air and beats the air into submission, thereby moving forward. And to a certain extent that is true. The problem is that the air, as we can clearly see, fights back. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to establish myself on a southern-ish course, like so, and then I'm going to straighten up and pull back on collective and start my descent. Now, if I just let everything go, we see that I still get this right-hand turn. So what I do is I push the trim button and make a counter bank to the left. Now we can barely see the farm over at our south. I'm gonna switch it over, and there it's pretty much in the middle of the reflector sight. So I'm gonna head over to there. I'm actually a bit overspeeding now, which can be told by the slight shaking of the entire aircraft. So what I'm gonna do then is pull back slightly, give slightly less collective, and use rudder pedals to keep myself more or less lined up. And I'm also going to use trim for this, because the trim actually works with the rudder pedal if you have it selected as such. And I recommend that you do that unless you want to keep using the rudder pedals for the entirety of the mission. Also, one very important feature that many seem to forget is this little button right here. This is the stabilizer and damper system. Now, if I turn this off, I don't know if I even can turn it off. Well, there is one way to turn it off. It's going to be slightly awkward, but bear with me here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply full power, and there it's out. What happened here was that I actually pulled so much collective that the rotors spun slowly enough that generators started working, which means that everything is now set back to sort of the default state at startup. And now you can see that I am having way more problems of actually keeping the helicopter stable in the air. Even though I'm going forward at a 200 kilometers per hour, I'm still wobbling about quite a bit. So I'm gonna reapply the stabilizer, and I'm quite more stable as it is. So we passed over the farm. I'm gonna make a sharp turn back. And as I do, we see that I lose speed, and as I lose the translational lift, we start to get some shakes. So I'm gonna keep going down, and all the time here I'm actually holding the trim button down, because as soon as I hit a flight profile that I sort of like, that's taking me where I want to go, I can let go, and then my trim will sort of keep the system in check. Now if I want to set down here, I'm going to need to descend. Of course I don't want to descend too quickly, or I will enter a vortex ring state. So what I do is I stabilize myself above the pad just a bit. There we go. And then slowly, ever so slowly, set myself down onto the actual pad with minuscule movements. A bit going backwards. There we go. And we should be touching down. There we go. I'm down. And I can put my collective down to idle. And that's it. So that's the general idea of how to set down, and of course that went, well, it went pretty well. Not exactly perfect, but way more than my very first attempt. Now, just let me talk a brief second about button mappings on the HOTAS. There aren't that many that you actually use. I have two major ones that I use right now. One of them is the trim button, which is right here. I have that to a corresponding thumb button that I have on my joystick. And the second thing that I have is this stabilizer button, which I have also to one of the top thumb buttons that I have on my joystick. Other than that, you may want to use the weapons controls. You may want to use other things. I'm going to switch on the Russian Betty. But those I believe to be the biggest ones. Other ones that I do have is I have the autopilot channels. We have two channels here, one for bank or for heading and one for altitude, and I have those mapped to the HOTAS as well as means for turning them off. That helps a whole lot when you're out flying with like longer missions, transport missions, etc. So one other button that I have is that, the trimmer reset button. Now that we are stationary, we're down on the pad, we want to make sure that when we start applying collective, when we start climbing up for takeoff, we want to know how the helicopter is going to act. And if I got my helicopter trimmed off to whatever direction, I will not be experiencing the helicopter in the same way as I'm used to. Some people say that you should keep the trim. Personally, I don't feel that way. I like the idea of starting, and every time I start, I know that the helicopter is in the default configuration. So, getting airborne is as simple as, well, it's not as simple as actually just applying collective and hope for the best, because as I showed you previously, as soon as you start applying collective, you're going to get a whole lot of other forces acting on the helicopter, which you must always counterbalance. To put it simply, every time you apply some kind of force on the helicopter, you're going to apply about 4 or 5 different ones. So you need to counteract all the others that you don't want. So for instance, now I know that when I start applying collective, and I'm going to do that just a bit here, we'll see that quite quickly the helicopter is going to start to spin to the left. It's moving just a tad right now, but it's going to be even more. So what I need to do then is to apply rudder to counteract. And we also see that the helicopter is kind of leaning towards its front left, so I have to counteract that. Oops. I have to counteract that by pulling the stick slightly back towards me and to the right. And once I have the profile down, I can start applying more collective and work towards it, and as soon as we get to a proper airborne state, I can hit the trim and keep going, and we're airborne, sort of. So I'm gonna straighten up, use the rudders for control, and let the trim button go, and now we're pretty much stable in the hover. We're sort of moving around a bit, but for instance, if you're using CTLD and you need to hover above a crate, this is fully sufficient to keep stationary and then pick up that crate. Transition into forward flight, just apply some more collective, counteract with the rudders, and push the nose over. Keep the trim button in, go through the transitional lift shakes, and as soon as we hit about 150 kilometers per hour, I let the trim button go, and I just let the helicopter settle into its forward flight position. Retrim back towards the left a bit, and smooth out and lower collective somewhat. Here I'm going to apply the autopilot as well, just to make sure that I keep roughly on the same heading. What's good also about the autopilot is that if I recognize that, okay, I'm actually a bit further away from the desired heading, I can just hit the trim button and then turn to whatever heading I want to go, as soon as I get to the heading that's correct for me, I let the trim button go and the autopilot resets. It's going to take a bit of time to reset fully, but we're pretty much back on it. There. So flying a helicopter is not exactly child's play, especially if you don't use the automation systems. It's going to be a very big amount of forces and counterforces acting and counteracting on the aircraft, and you need to account for all of them in real time, pretty much. And I'm not going to say it's easy, but it sure is stimulating, I can say that much. So I'm going to head back and see if I can make another landing and stick it as well as I got the last one. We'll see if I can actually find the landing pad. We'll see over here, I believe. Are. I'm going to use the autopilot to help me guide my way. Heading hold. I'm going to hit altitude hold as well. One thing that's very good to remember when we're talking altitude hold is that we actually need to remember to disengage them if we start yanking the controls about, or we are going to lose a great deal of authority. Also, when we're talking about autopilot and specifically the rudder pedals, you can actually get to a state where you're in forward flight, but the rudder pedals are skewed over like so, and so when you release it, you're gonna get rotation to whatever direction. And the easiest way to alleviate that is simply to use the trim reset button. Put yourself in a forward path and then hit trim reset. It's going to yank back a bit, typically, if you're in forward flight, but then you're pretty much all set. So here we go back towards our landing pad. I'm going to start to lower the helicopter. Descent speeds are always a thing of contention in a helicopter. Now I'm flying at about 200 kilometers per hour, so it's more or less behaving like an aircraft, but especially when you get below, say, 100 kilometers per hour, you're going to get into very serious risk of entering a vortex ring state if you're descending too quickly. Which means now, as I'm slowing down, I need to counteract any kind of... I need to pretty much, when I get to this point, I need to keep... Oops. And there we have a vortex ring. Come on, up you go. Yep, there we are. That was a vortex ring, and it was not a good one. I managed to get out of it now. I'm gonna say, in that flight regime right there, your chance of managing and mastering a vortex ring state like that is about 50-50, or at least it is for me. So, but I actually wound up pretty well, because now I'm down and I'm close to the ground and I'm close to the pad. All I have to do is finally trim myself down onto the pad, just a bit further ahead, and we'll sort of snake our way onto the pad, like so. Twist a bit more torque because I don't. Whoops. Yeah. What I was just saying about multitudes of forces acting on the helicopter, I put on a tiny bit of torque and immediately the aircraft started spinning in, well, more ways than one. So let's just plop ourselves down here. We can actually take a fair bit of abuse on the main gear and still work it out. So that's pretty much how we do it. I hope you find this little video useful, and I wish you the best of luck in future helicopter endeavors. And as always, have a good day, a good night, a good, well, whatever.